for the gifts that we have to give, and for this community that truly seeks to live out its covenant of love and service. May we be grateful. One of the particular joys of serving this congregation is that I get to spend every Sunday surrounded by this incredibly beautiful artwork and listening to so much fantastic music. So much thanks to Jill and Leslie today for sharing your gifts with us. Thank you. So all of February, we've been celebrating Black History Month here at UUI. And in my sermons this month, I've been talking about the African American experience, particularly within Unitarian Universalism, and the ways that Black people have and are claiming their own theological space within this religious movement that we call UU. You may recall we kicked off the month talking about Dr. Anthony Pinn, a contemporary Black humanist theologian with a strong Unitarian Universalist connection, who advocates for an explicit atheism. And I mentioned in that service that Black humanism has somewhat different historical roots than white humanism. White humanism is a response to the Enlightenment. Typically, it grows out of scientific rationalism and modernity, and this idea that traditional notions of God no longer fit what we think we know about the universe. Black humanism, on the other hand, is more often a response to the problem of evil and suffering in the world. Black humanism looks at the traditional notion of God, which says that an all-powerful, benevolent, and loving deity is ultimately in charge of everything. And Black humanism says, really? Does that describe our world exactly? And specifically, does that describe the African American experience? Black humanism asks, how do you account for God's goodness in light of Black suffering, from slavery right up to today? If God is good, why does God not liberate Black people? What exactly is God waiting for, it asks. How can this be the plan? Indeed, in the 1970s, a Black theologian named William R. Jones, who was coincidentally a Unitarian Universalist, wrote a famous book called Is God a White Racist? And Jones argued satirically that if God has all the power and God is in charge, then all evidence suggests that God must be a white racist. Jones was making the case satirically for a Black humanism. Now, the question of suffering is ultimately a question about hope. Given that life is hard, given that our bodies age, given the realities of illness, given violence and hunger and human cruelty, what are our grounds for hope? For Dr. Anthony Pinn, as a humanist, we humans are the only grounds for hope. We are left to our own devices, cosmically speaking. We are on our own. And our hope as individuals, for Dr. Pinn, lies in our struggle against all the oppressive forces that seek to rob us of our humanity. For Dr. Pinn, whether we lose, whether we win, at least in the struggle, there's dignity and our humanity is affirmed. So hope is the struggle. Today I want to introduce, as we close out Black History Month, a different perspective and a different path from another contemporary African American theologian and scholar, Dr. Monica Coleman. Dr. Monica Coleman taught for 10 years at Claremont School of Theology, where she became the first African American woman to be appointed full professor. Today she's Professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. And Dr. Coleman is not UU. She's ordained within the African Methodist Episcopal tradition. She's certainly familiar with the humanism of Dr. Anthony Pinn, since he wrote the foreword to the book that I'm going to be talking about, her book called Making a Way Out of No Way. But Dr. Coleman is coming at the problem of Black suffering from a different perspective than Dr. Pinn. For Dr. Coleman, hope is about creative transformation, not just struggle. And although nothing is guaranteed to us, we are not left to struggle alone because God is with us. Now, Dr. Coleman is offering us a different way of thinking about God than we may be used to. It's a way of thinking about God that is often congenial to Unitarian Universalists when they encounter it, plays very well with our principles and our approach to life and our approach to the practice of religious community. So I wanted to offer it to you today as an alternative theological path that UUs may be interested in, one that is not necessarily Christian, although it can be, but it's also not strictly humanist or atheist. It's sort of a third way. So to begin with, Dr. Coleman is what is known as a womanist theologian. Womanism is theology that is specifically grounded in the lives and experiences of black women. Womanist theology is always strongly concerned with the experience of hope. It is about hope. The expression, making a way out of no way, from which Dr. Coleman takes the title of her book, has been the experience of hope for black women throughout history. While suffering under the twin oppressions of both racism and sexism, the survival of the black family, by extension, the survival of the black community, has often fallen on black women. They have had the problem of transmitting hope generationally against incredible obstacles and odds when hope seems like an illusion. Black women have had the problem again and again as individuals and as a community of finding a way forward when all paths seem closed to them, of making a way out of no way. And Dr. Coleman finds in the testimony of black women's experience that God has been with them through their struggles. God has been the source of hope. God has again and again made a way out of no way. So traditionally, womanism has been a form of Christian theology, which speaks to the unique ways that black women have encountered God and Jesus in their lives. But Dr. Coleman wants to create theology within this testimony, within this lived experience of a God who brings hope. She's not an atheist like Dr. Pinn. But there's still this question of evil and suffering. If God is all-powerful, and God is all good, and God is in charge, then why do we suffer? Why are we left to struggle for hope with pain and sorrow? Why does God not free the oppressed? This is a real theological problem. In her book, Dr. Coleman remembers her time working in a woman's shelter, tending to a woman who had been physically abused by her boyfriend, who did not have the internal or the external resources to leave this abusive boyfriend, and who was, in fact, in danger of losing custody of her own children as a result, because she also could not protect them. And the women in the shelter have gathered around, and they're braiding her hair to nurture her and comfort her and try to support her in finding some way through. And she is plaintively asking, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And Dr. Coleman is wondering for herself what theology has to say to this woman. What is a response to her suffering, her unique situation, her intimate encounter with violence and suffering that honors her own agency, but also offers hope? Dr. Coleman says, I wanted to connect the specificity of her story with a worldview that acknowledges the reality of evil and finds opportunities for life in each new moment with either waiting on God to make it happen or leaving her to do it all by herself. Now, Dr. Coleman also wants to expand womanism beyond Christianity, because today we live in an increasingly pluralistic and multi-faith world. So how, she wonders, does womanism speak to other faiths and other traditions? What about Muslim women? What about Hindus, Buddhists, Jews? What about people who practice indigenous religions or traditional African religions like Yoruba or Ifa? In her book, Dr. Coleman describes participating in a West African dance ritual with other African American women that honored a particular Orisha, a divine spirit, one associated with deep personal change. And the women are dancing the ritual, and they spoke to the liberating power that they felt, but they didn't have the language to name it within traditional Christianity. I don't know how this works, a woman told her. I just know that it makes me feel whole. So Dr. Coleman wants to know, how do we understand healing and transformation, the experience of spiritual wholeness outside of the context of Christianity? And the answer she proposes lies in a different way of thinking about God. Dr. Coleman calls this a postmodern womanist theology, a womanist theology that is no longer exclusively Christian. It makes space for other religious traditions and understandings, and it rejects the idea precisely that idea of the all-powerful God who is in charge. Instead, Dr. Coleman grounds her vision of hope, remember womanism is all about hope, in what is called a process theology understanding of God. This is a way of thinking about God that tends to be very congenial to Unitarian Universalist ways of thinking. So when you find a UU minister or a UU theologian who was also a theist, very often they are some kind of process theologian. And process theology gets a little dense, so I'm going to give you like the very brief 30,000-foot view of what this is. So the fundamental idea behind process theology is that everything that is in a constant state of change and becoming. So this includes the universe, it includes us, it includes God. God is not the same as the universe, but God is not separate from the universe either. Instead, God is in us and we are in God. It is an intimate relationship, and it changes both parties. Theologian Marjorie Suhaki describes the presence of God as like water flowing over stones. The water rushes in to fill every possible space, but it doesn't obliterate the stone's integrity. It doesn't overwrite the stones. At the same time, the water is subtly altering the surface of the stone. It is changing it. And the stone is changing the composition of the water. Both are changed by the interaction. So Monica Coleman writes, in every moment, God breathes into us, helps to create who we are. There is something of God, she says, in everyone. This is also true of God's relationship with the non-human aspects of the world. And what is God doing? God is calling, influencing, leading, guiding, and co-creating the entire world. So this idea of co-creation, that's an important word. Co-creation is at the crux of process theology. Because in this vision, God and the world, God and us, we're like in a dance together. And both parties in this dance have agency and integrity. Both parties are absolutely free. God in this vision is not all-powerful, is not in charge. Everything that is in the universe, physical stuff, us, we have our own kind of power too. We have our own kind of integrity. We are creative beings. God can't just make things happen, snap God's fingers and reorder reality like some kind of magic super being, right? This is not the kind of thing that God is. And that is not our relationship to God to be controlled, to be magicked. Instead, in this vision, God is more like a fountain of loving creativity. And God is a source of freedom and possibility. And God offers that freedom and possibility to us. So God takes in the world as it is in every moment, and from a place of love offers us creative future possibilities that would otherwise not be available to us. We in our freedom respond to these possibilities. The choices we make change us, and they also change God. God is not outside the process like some unchangeable, eternal, untouchable thing. God is intimate, up close, present with us in every moment. And then out of this change, out of the choices we make, out of this new relationship that we have with God and God has with us, God offers up new possibilities, and we respond, and the cycle continues. A mutually co-creative partnership, like a dance that's always happening between reality and God, between us and God. Now, because God is constantly introducing novelty into the world, we are never truly defined by our past. But the past is not nothing either. At any moment, there are a variety of forces that are impinging on our freedom and our choices, that are pushing and pulling us in different directions. Right? The past, the weight of all of the choices that we have made, that's real. It has its own force in our lives. And the inertia of the past, if we give into it, encourages us to just repeat and recycle old patterns, past experiences. Think of those patterns in our personal lives that we may find ourselves returning to again and again. Right? Our addictions and compulsions, be they large or small, overspending, consumerism, bad relationships, self-deception, controlling behavior, whatever it is. God introduces newness into our life, and we can choose to enter into it, but we do have to choose. And Dr. Coleman calls this process creative transformation. She says creative transformation is the change that occurs when God's offer of novelty is accepted and incorporated into us. Creative transformation incorporates the past and moves beyond it in a way that we could not have imagined by ourselves. So the weight of others' choices is also real. We are relational beings. We can hurt each other. We can impede each other just as we can heal and free each other. In a process theology way of looking at the world, each of us is fully free and fully responsible for the choices that we make. God cannot and does not save us from the impact of our choices. We can help, we can harm, we can heal, we can hurt. Think of social patterns we return to again and again collectively that repeat expressions of discrimination, of fear, of xenophobia, of ecological harm, and so on. What God does is ensure that we are never trapped by our past, because there are always new choices being presented. So the weight and the integrity of our past means that our choices matter. It matters what we do with our lives. It matters what we do with our freedom. Our past choices individually and collectively can constrain our present opportunities, but they do not determine our future. We are free. We are not fated. And when it seems like the weight of the past has become like this invincible well of gravity, pulling us irresistibly into the single point of its center, God is there to make a way out of no way. For this reason, Dr. Coleman says, hope is always justified. That is the source of hope, and it is always justified. Now, the process theology idea of God may seem a little strange, or like a very limited kind of God if you are used to thinking of God as Lord, as a being with a plan who is in charge of every moment and who can unilaterally reshape the world. The God who is Lord can abruptly rewrite history, can end history, can usher in salvation, can reward the good and punish the wicked, can set things right in this life or the next. The God of process theology is nothing like that. This God is more like the spirit of creativity and possibility. It is love at work in the world, patiently, steadfastly, faithfully. This God appears as the voice inside you that speaks a new truth, or as the creative spark that opens up new possibilities. It's the idea that comes unbidden. So whatever our specific theology, I think we can all relate to the experience that the change that we need, the moment of inspiration, the new idea, the flash of insight, the moment of courage, the breakthrough in kindness, the power to say no to the old and yes to the new, the vision of life itself. These moments in life often come to us unbidden, unexpected, as a gift, as a grace. We can't explain this gift of newness that suddenly appears in our lives. We can't take credit for it. We may doubt it. We may question it. If we are wise, we simply receive it in wonder and in gratitude. The ancient Greeks spoke of the muses. The Romans spoke of the genius. Monica Coleman would say this is God as the spirit of creative transformation, offering you something new. It surprises us, she says. It amazes us. It is something we might not have seen on our own. It is amazing and creative. And creative transformation for Dr. Coleman is the source of hope. And she identifies Black women's experience of making a way out of no way with God's offering of possibility and the steadfast courage with which they have embraced those possibilities. She says the survival of Black women testifies to the reality of this creative spirit. It justifies hope. And of course, God is not just the God of Black women, so their testimony is testimony for everyone. It justifies hope for us all. Now, womanism, rooted as it is in Christianity, focuses in teaching and healing in particular as a means of transformation. because Jesus as teacher and healer is the model for transformation. But Monica Coleman's postmodern womanism doesn't require the same focus on Jesus. She doesn't object to it, but she says we can find the same life-giving creative transformation in any community that is grounded in teaching and healing, in any religious tradition, in the dance of the traditional African people, in Buddhism, in Christianity, in Unitarian Universalism, wherever there is community that is grounded in teaching and healing. Salvation, creative transformation happens in community, Coleman says. It's bigger than the individual. It may start with the individual, but it always expands into a collective vision. The creative transformation that God calls us into is ultimately about justice. Making a way out of no way, Coleman says, involves God's presentation of unseen possibilities, the goal of justice, and a challenge to the existing order. And this is because we are all interdependent. We are all linked. This is why God's call to freedom and possibility always becomes a call to collective justice making, because we are all getting free together or we are not really getting free. And this is, of course, deeply consonant with Unitarian Universalist vision that says we all matter, we are all interconnected and interdependent, and together we can create a love so big that it ultimately holds everyone. Together we can create a love so big that it ultimately holds everyone. Postmodern womanism in this regard echoes the words of the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, who says, we must remember two things. This is no time for a casual faith, and this is no time to go it alone. We need each other. We can't heal our world by ourselves. And Dr. Coleman would agree and add that we are never alone. God is always with us, but not God as Lord of time and space, God as a spirit of love that calls us to higher possibilities, God as an inexhaustible fount of vision and imagination, God as creative transformation that ensures we are never defined by our past as individuals or as a people, God that offers us choices that only we can say yes or no to. And maybe you find this idea of God persuasive, maybe intriguing, maybe perplexing. Maybe you find this God familiar as an old friend and a faithful companion. Whatever our theologies, I invite us all to think about what gives us hope, what gives us courage, and what gives us inspiration. May we return again and again to these inward springs. May love open a way for all of us, and may we choose to follow its blessed path. Blessed be, and amen.